Hey, everybody. I'm here with Jennifer D'Agostino, a seasoned HR executive with over 25 years of global leadership experience, building high performing teams, scaling organizations, and driving strategic transformation. Known for translating vision into action, she has led enterprise wide talent strategies, redesigned leadership pipelines, and built programs that align people strategy with business goals. A trusted advisor to executive teams, she leads with empathy, transparency, and clarity, creating cultures where people feel empowered to grow. Widely recognized as the Queen of GSD, getting shit done, she combines strategic insight with operational excellence to deliver results at last. Nice nickname to have for sure. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, John. It's great to be with you. Thanks. Yes, someone told me once that I was the most working VP they'd ever met. And I took that as a compliment of being not one of the alternative options of a VP that doesn't actually do much.
Like just a delegator, right? So
A
you're gonna
delegator,
roll up your
kind
sleeve
of,
and
or,
get in there.
the worst where it's like they do a lot of big thinking, but then they don't really help you execute or help you see the path of like execution. It's just like a lot of ideas get dropped and then people have to scurry.
Nice. Well, I mean, we had talked a little bit before about the fact that you're actually looking at pivoting your career now and finding a new role for yourself.
Hmm.
Maybe tell us a little bit about your background and what you're looking to do in the next little bit.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts about your next big challenge?
It's interesting because my background has always been talent acquisition. So I have a true sweet spot for recruiting and all of the skills that it requires to be like a really good recruiter. And I've gotten to work with some of the best and have seen them excel. I love building teams and helping people excel in their careers. So that's been super fun, of building really high performing talent acquisition teams. And then in the last 5 years, I've spent a lot of time doing talent management. And so looking at how to accelerate one's career, how to think about leadership development, what are the competencies that really make for a great leader. And then also helping companies think about succession planning and how talent has major implications for their achieving their business goals. So I think the future could lead me in a couple of different directions. I'm interested in leading an HR team. I could stay in talent management or talent acquisition, but I do hope that at some point in my career I can move to that chief people officer role. And it's as I'm going through the job search process right now, you see there's profiles of chief people officers that come up through the ranks of HR, right? They have HR ops and they know benefits and comp, and that's not me. But I am interested in getting involved with a company that really sees talent strategy and talent management as kind of that critical competency for a chief people officer. So yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah, a lot of times too, when we were talking to like HR executives and they're trying to figure out how do I get into the head of or chief people officer or CHRO type position, and a lot of times, sometimes the path forward is almost a lateral kind of different kind of path where okay, coming in if you haven't got the generalist experience where you've touched on comp and ben and all the different aspects that may be needed, but you have some strong acumen, going to like a smaller company that's smaller in headcount, they're more than happy to have someone that's senior that has experience in certain things, maybe a specialist, right? Come on, become their head of HR. If you worked in a large enterprise, like perfect example would be people that worked at GE, right? Where they have a huge training pipeline and then they go off and they become heads of HR in many other companies and so on. So it's that always is an option where you say, okay, look at the company headcount, the level of responsibility is way less than I'm doing now, but I'm getting the title. And then now, once you get that title, then you can sort of move your way back up and go from a 500 headcount company to 1500 to 5,000
Hmm.
global, right? And that's sometimes it's a way to get in the door where otherwise, if you're just butting your head against the competition for, let's say, large enterprise HR executives, where the mandate we get as a recruiter would be, well, find us someone that's done this exact job for 5 years at a competitor. That's literally what they're going to say. And if you haven't done the exact same job and the exact title, then not to say that you're not qualified, you probably are qualified, but they don't want to see it. They don't want to, it doesn't tick their boxes because that's what it is. And I think now, considering the market where you have high unemployment. There's a lot of talent out there. It's become an employer's market for hiring. And they're just more picky now. They're like, hey, we can afford to be picky because there's candidates out there. Now, reverse that 3 years ago, 4 years ago during COVID, they would hire, you know, they would, whoever they could get, they would hire because it was so tight, so many offers going out. I remember sending out, counter offers, over 50,000 over asking to get
Yeah.
people to come. It was bananas. So, I mean, obviously the pendulum swings.
Hmm.
So what are some things you've considered, have you thought about like fractional HR or any kind of other avenues you could do?
Yeah, I'm interested in the fractional. I'm interested to figure out what is fractional versus contract, right? Is it just another kind of term that's in the lexicon now, or is it like they're actually offering a different type of value? Because when I think about like a interim head of HR, interim head of talent management, they need to bring a set of skills to that role that's ready to drop in and kind of solve problems immediately. They need to be able to figure out very quickly what the major issues are and then try and do quick return activities. Whereas I think of, a full-time chief human resource or head of talent coming in, spending, a listening session and kind of getting up to speed and then ramping up on a much slower scale. I guess I'm assuming that fractional is really immediate return and immediate support until they figure out what their long-term strategy is. But that also kind of sounds like consulting or contract work. And so I don't know
Yeah,
how it's different.
there's a lot of blurred lines when it comes to all of this. And you ask many different people, like it was funny, we had a fractional event and I think everybody on the panel had a different definition of what fractional would be.
Okay.
What I would take it as is if you're interim, so just a definition, interim would be you're basically doing the job, but it's only for a limited time, right?
Right.
It's for 3 months, 6 months, a mat leave, you're coming in like that, that's interim. So you're doing the job, you have the authority and all that, but it's limited. Then there's contract work where it's like you're being hired for a project. Like we need
Mhm.
someone to come in and do compensation analysis for X, Y, and Z positions. That's a specific project you're doing. You're getting paid for that project only, and they probably still have a head of HR there, right?
Right, right.
So there's contract work like that. Then fractional is basically the way we kind of like the way I like to look at it as you're doing the C-level role that they want, but you're doing it, a slice of the pie, a fraction of the time. So you're
Mhm,
saying, I'm committing to 1 day a week or 2 days a week or 3 days a week. So you're getting the full service of the position, but only for those
mm,
days of the week,
I see.
a certain amount of hours, maybe. I know in general, it usually goes by the day. So you pay for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days.
Mhm,
Fractional fees range from 8 to 12K per month on average, or around $350 an hour for fractional executives. This is just, again, averages. It can
mhm,
vary. I've seen some people charging full-time salary prices if
mm,
they're offering a lot of service. But the whole is that fractional person is integrated with the team. They're on the Slack channel. They're basically doing the C-level position. It's just their office hours are limited. And obviously their impact they can do is, you know, comparative to their level of time and budget you're giving them.
yeah,
So that the idea too is that you're doing a fractional, usually in a startup or a company
mhm,
that can't afford that, hefty 400K salary and benefits and salary burden. You're paying a retainer as a 1099 or as to a 1099 company or LLC that they have,
mhm,
but they're still fully integrated in decision making and all that. And so it's more than just a consultant that's just giving you like, you may hire a Deloitte and they'll give you a proposal. Here's our proposal, but you don't have to follow it. With the fractionals, like, hey, they have some skin in the game in terms of being, part of the team, and you want to listen to what they're doing. So I think fractional can be a good opportunity for some people where it's, and we've talked about this in some of our events, but it can be very risky for people in the sense that if you're not comfortable with business development, and that's
mhm,
a huge aspect they don't talk to you about. You always hear, oh yeah, you can get all these great customers, you can do all this great fractional work. It pays really well. If you have 5 customers billing 1 day each, you can make $500,000. There's some fractionals making $1 million a year, but The big caveat star in the corner of small print is you have to go and do the BD to get all your customers, or you're getting referrals from companies like us and so on. But I think that's the aspect. And if you haven't done sales before, if you're not comfortable doing B2B sales,
Hmm.
if you're not good at selling yourself, in a pitch, if you're just not comfortable with it, then it's probably not going to be a good experience. And so there is some agencies where there's large groups of fractionals working together where they have their own sales team, and the
Hmm.
sales team brings in leads and basically gives them out to the team.
Yeah.
There's models like that. Typically, they will take a bigger percentage of, 40% or something of your fees and so on. But it's really just determining for yourself, like, what am I comfortable doing? Do you want to spend half your days doing BD? Because even though you're servicing customers, you never stop selling. If you're fractional, that certain contract will end on this date or whatnot. And the idea also for fractional is not to be a permanent fixture. It's to build a strategy and then leave, and maybe you hire someone. So we've seen a lot of scenarios where the fractional will go in, build a strategy out, then say, okay, listen, I'm not doing all this tactical work. Like, I'm not going to, you're a recruiter, for example, or you're doing talent strategy. You don't want to recruit 20 positions for them. You're like, that's too much time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hire a director of recruiting now. And now that the plan is in place, the comps and set up and everything, they can run with it and execute. That's the ideal that we've seen for most fractionals, that they're not really, they may be hands-on to a certain extent, but they don't want to be doing only tactical work. It's high level strategy. That's why you're paying a C-level person,
Right.
right?
Right.
So there's
It's an
obviously some
interesting,
nuance to all of this.
yeah, it's an interesting model because I think, there are elements where I think a C-suite person brings their credibility, they bring their experience, and so other C-suite executives would listen and, take what they're saying seriously. And then there's also a part of me that's like, if they don't know the business and they haven't been fully integrated, are they going to be taken as seriously as someone who is like a full-time person? I mean, of course, it varies to the company and to the C-suite team that you're dealing with. And I guess also, what you're bringing to the table. If you're bringing good ideas and you can execute against them, then maybe they take you more seriously, right? But I mean, I guess I've seen so many C-suite new people come in and have to take that time to build that credibility, that it's an interesting thing that you're gonna just come and get credibility. Or maybe it's that you're coming in to do certain tasks and you do those tasks, and then credibility is not really, you're not building that. You're just executing, like, I'm gonna build the strategy and then I'm gonna bring the person in and then they have to have the credibility.
Well, I mean, I think you always have to build yourself up with
Yeah.
whoever it is, and finding good customers is another pickle for people. It's really who you're working with. Do you have the rapport?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are they going to listen to what your recommendations are?
Right.
Are they going to give you budget, especially for certain programs you're trying to implement? Like, those are all questions to do part of the vetting process, like for the fractional before they sign a contract. I mean, I've heard some horror stories too, with people like, just, they're doing fractional work. They want a client so bad, they'll just take on anyone. And then they find out it's a nightmare, or
Mhm.
there's a misalignment on like what was expected to be done, right? And so
Mhm. Mhm.
having a good contract is equally as important. And yeah, so yeah, it's with as with anything in consulting, it's always a race to the bottom. Like, you can find
Yeah.
people on Fiverr and those kind of websites, do recruitment or HR work very cheaply, but what kind of quality are you getting? And so I think it's really just being able to leverage your experience, your business acumen, the logos of where you've been before,
Right.
and
Right.
then also niching down to a certain level to say, I'm not going to do all HR things, but here's 5 problems or projects that I can really support you on, and what I'm really good at, and leveraging that as this is why you're paying me my huge fee, because you're getting the 25 years of experience you have, right? And in team building and so on. So that's all important stuff. But I would love to hear from you, like, when you were in TA and whatnot, like, what's been your agency experience? Did you work with agencies before? Do you enjoy working with agencies? How was it? I mean, I've been in the industry long enough to know everybody's got a horror story.
Well, I think I think the most challenging that we experienced was, and this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, was we had within our IT department specifically, we had a lot of demand for contract work. And then we had an unhappy customer where they were saying, "We're not getting the type of talent that we want from this vendor. You've got to go out to the market and get additional vendors." And so then it was a bit of a free for all that any vendor was trying to contact us. And I think that's when it becomes this like very acute pain point when you have multiple vendors and there's no streamline. The recruiter then is just becoming a vendor management system. And we weren't big enough to have a vendor management system. We were small. And so the recruiter's not doing any real recruiting. They're just managing the vendors. That's painful to watch as a leader because you have misalignment on what the business expects. The recruiter's unhappy. They're not really doing any recruiting. The vendors hate it because they're working through a recruiter. They don't have direct access to the hiring manager. It just is like a lose-lose. So the best scenarios I've found is when the vendor is giving us a technical specialty. They have the talent in spades of that technical specialty, whether it's IT or something else, and they are just brought in as like a wholesale to support that business unit. And the recruiter steps out. It's like a specific scope of work. The hiring managers are in charge. They work directly with the vendors, and the recruiters don't touch it. And that's where I've seen it work the best because then you can use your talent to do focus on other stuff. The agencies can do their job the best. The hiring managers are much more happy. Um, but for some reason, doesn't seem to be how it works most of the time. So yeah, I mean, I've had good experiences with agencies for sure, but then I think the other part of it is that uh, as a recruiter, you feel like I should be able to do this. I should be able to find these people. And the reality is it's not like an ego issue. It's a business issue where the business is asking for something either on scale or on a technical level. And that agency may just have a better set of resources. And so the recruiter has to kind of check their ego to say, like, I didn't fail at this, but this agency is going to just provide a better business solution. And I have seen ego get in the way quite a few times. Maybe even my own ego of like, oh, we could do this better. Maybe we just simply can't.
Yeah, I mean, I think realizing that, listen, if you have a big enough company and there's enough different roles, like there's no way to be a master of all of them. It's just
That's right.
not possible. And even for ourselves as recruiters too, with our business, like we don't recruit everything. We just don't, right? But I can totally understand the ego part of and the kind of sometimes just outright hostility between maybe TA and agency of like, and I think when there's a job market where there's layoffs happening too, it's also not only just the outside competition, it's the feeling of like, oh, if I'm not doing something, then why am I here? Why they're going to keep me, right? So there's a fear of losing their role just because there's so many layoffs. And TA, I mean, I've seen the amount of layoffs the last few years. It's been absolutely,
Hmm.
companies have been decimated, right? Recruiters are always the first. Recruiters and salespeople are always one getting chopped. It's just, you know, we're expendable.
Which I mean, I think it's very hard for a recruiter, to kind of continuously have that happen in their career and not have a feeling of like, their value being decimated, right? Because they know the company best. They're selling the company. They're the first face of the company. And they might have done it, for 10 years, 15 years. And they have represented that company so well to then be the first cut. It is heartbreaking. So I definitely can say that, recruiters have a nimbleness and like a nine lives cat kind of scenario where if they get cut and they get placed someplace else, they're going to rebrand themselves. They're going to figure out what that industry needs. They're so agile in learning new skills and new industries. And now with AI, they can become smart on things very quickly, right? Like, so if they don't have that industry experience, I don't care because they have all of the recruiter skills. They can learn the industry stuff.
I mean, that's always an important factor to mention to customers too. Is like, your industry is not as special as you think it is.
They love to think they're so special.
Oh, our industry is different. I've heard that. I mean, in pitch meetings, I can tell you, I've had a dollar for every time I've heard that. Our industry is special.
Yeah.
I remember we were talking to a Windows manufacturing company, and they're like, "Well, we want a marketer that that's done Windows before." And I'm like, "Listen, I did a search quick. I could tell them, listen, just quickly, I can tell you there's not in your state. There's maybe three or four other in the country that for the same size window company you are. Do you want to bring someone from California to Wyoming? You know, I think it was they're like in the middle of nowhere. Like it was just and they're like, do you think they're gonna move to sell windows for you here? Like, or how about we just find you someone that has done the same aspects of the job in marketing, has you're selling a B2C product for homes as well as to businesses. So someone has done that kind of marketing in the same kind of not maybe the industry, but same kind of products, building materials and so on, right? Like so you can talk about it. But no, they just they wanted what they wanted, right? And so we see the same thing with when we talk about hiring HR executives, right? Like they're people have this mindset of what they want in their head, and God forbid you tell them anything different when they want their Jello mold candidate, we call it.
Well, and I do think that that is kind of it's a little bit of a red flag for me in terms of how are you thinking about skills and competencies versus like previous experience. So if we think about like this next generation, they're not going to stay in one company. They're not going to stay in one industry. They're going to have multitude of experiences, and like the idea of like a job path, I feel like is kind of dead because it's more about competencies that you're learning or skills that you're obtaining and then where you can place them. And so if you're really wed to like the person that sold the windows, you're going to lose because people are going to, rethink about, oh, well, they could do different types of sales or do different type of expression. It goes into that whole space of like really thinking about lived experiences and how people could bring different lived experiences to a job. And I wonder if that mold of like, oh no, they have to have these things just comes from like a fear.
It is 100%.
I don't know that role. I've never experienced that life. I don't know. Could they be better than me? When, man, that is a scary place to be operating from.
But it's fear. It's a risk aversion. It all comes down
Yeah.
to risk, right? For them,
Yeah.
it's like if I hire the same thing as what I got,
That worked.
then it worked before, it'll work again, and there's less risk because they're doing it for a competitor, so it's less
Yes.
risky for me. And
Yeah.
I get that, like, having run a business, like, you're always trying to reduce your risk, but you can also overlook a lot of good candidates that have the drive or are very highly motivated or transferable skills that totally make sense in your business or bringing value from another industry. Like, that outside perspective can bring so much value to a stagnant or like, certain industries are very kind of behind, let's say, right? Construction would be one of them. Windows, I imagine, probably as well, right? So I get that. Where do you think? So with AI, I mean, we're hearing all the buzz about now, just funny stuff that's happened in the news. One of, I saw news, I interviewed a candidate, and after 5 minutes, did I realize they were an AI candidate? It was not a real person. Or I did an interview for 10 minutes and I had to interview with an AI who was questioning me. It wasn't a real
Right.
person doing my screen.
Right.
My feelings were hurt because I felt the company didn't give a crap about me. They just sent a bot to talk to me, you know, didn't feel special or important. How do you think, like, where do you see AI affecting recruiting? And I mean, for the research piece, absolutely agree. It can help.
Hmm.
But for everything else, is it doing more damage or what do you think?
I mean, I think right now it's doing a lot of damage because I think most companies don't have the technology to receive the volume that they're or to deal with the volume of applicants that they're getting, right? So like the majority of companies are just, taking in all of these applicants and the applicants are coming from AI or they're matching, through AI. And so hundreds and hundreds of applicants coming in and you don't know what's real and you don't know what's good, and so you just have a poor recruiter that's just going through manually just looking at those. So that's a major I think area that is going to impact if companies turned the faucet on and said we need to do immediate hiring, which they're not doing because of the market. And so If they were to do that, I think they would have a really difficult time hiring quickly right now because they wouldn't be able to get through the volume that they're receiving. And then there's the element of like, what's real and how do they assess the candidate? Are they really as good at as their resume says? And how do they assess them? If the candidate shows up as an AI, how do they deal with that? So I think that this is going to force us into a time where we have to really rethink the process of evaluating candidates and assessing skills and really try to rethink about the candidate's experience and what the company can deal with, right? The company is not going to just automatically invest in all of this technology with recruiting, especially if they don't do a ton of recruiting. And so I think we're going to be at a tipping point pretty soon where a company says, "Oh, we do need to hire," and then they can't, or it becomes really challenging for them to. How do they rethink the process to make it more feasible? I do also think that this is turning into a place where if you know someone at the company, you're gonna get an interview because that's the way to cut through all the noise. But that means that we're getting more invested in just our personal networks, and so the bias, like that personal bias, is gonna just ramp up. So people that are coming from other jobs or don't have networks or first-time workers, they're gonna be at a significant disadvantage because they don't have that connection. I don't know, it feels like it's at a tipping point where the thing has to get completely broken to get rebuilt.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. And it's interesting you brought up with the bias. It's one thing we often don't even think about.
Mhm.
Referrals are great. Oh, send us referrals of candidates. And it's like, yes, but everyone who's sending you a referral is sending you someone they like. And obviously, if it's your buddy, you're going to refer them. And they may not always be the perfect candidate. I mean, they're qualified, sure, but they may not be the perfect candidate for the company. And then you build sort of the whole culture of the company. If it's all from referrals, it's people that just want to, like, maybe they're all friends, but it could also create if all your friends are the same,
Mhm.
it becomes kind of a stagnant culture. You're not bringing people that are outside of that social group, right? Like I remember being at some companies where it's like, oh yeah, Cindy's aunt works here in accounting, and Jimmy's wife is here too, and it becomes like, I hate hearing the word. We're like a family. But the idea of like, yeah, like if you have enough people of friends and family you're bringing in, at some point you're creating a uniculture almost of like a community of people that all know each other. And so, we talk about inclusiveness, belonging, all those other good things, or trying to break into that. Good luck breaking in where you come in and there's all these cliques, because that's also could be a problem I've seen in many companies where, you have the friend group that they go out drinking every Friday night or something silly. Or, I mean, the latest thing for me is hearing people, oh, we play pickleballs on Fridays. Don't get me started on pickleball. It's a thing. It really is.
It is a thing. I mean,
Um,
I think that goes back to, the kind of like, this is my comfort zone. I'm gonna stay in my comfort zone with my comfort people and my comfort activities, and I'm not gonna, like, challenge my own thinking, and while you have customers and business is good, you can do that. But as soon as the market shifts or if competition increases, like then you're really asleep at the wheel and pivoting then is really challenging. And I mean, I do think that having different people at the table, they think differently, maybe they come from different backgrounds, maybe they have different work experiences, that makes for a better end product. I mean, the studies have shown that it does. And so if you don't have all those different opinions at the table, then you're probably going to lose in the end to competition anyway. It's hard to take off the comfy jeans, right? Like if you're in your comfy zone, you don't want to mess with it, right? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think it starts off innocuous and with
Yes.
the best intentions, but over time can create problems, over time for sure, with
Yeah.
certain things. Speaking of problems, we saw this year some major changes, let's say, and maybe the last couple of years. The pendulum, the social pendulum goes from left to right, back and forth, and so on.
Mm,
We had a big push with DEI and so on after George Floyd. Everyone knows the story. Now we've seen SHRM this year remove the equity, the E from DE and I. We've
mhm.
seen the Harvard decision where they ruled against, let's say, perceived discrimination that was happening with this with the Asian students at the school.
Hmm.
And I can understand both sides of, again, it's well-meaning people trying to make a difference. How they do that, what policies are enacted, and also the fact that it is a zero-sum game. There's only so many jobs. So there's always going to be a winner and loser, and who gets to choose that is something I think we'll always debate for years. Like it's just a very nuanced thing. It's hard to get it right. So where do you see what's next for DE and I, or let's say D and I now, diversity and inclusion?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that with the pendulum swing, you have to be adaptive to say, okay, having diverse ideas at the table is important for the business and how we produce, whatever it is we produce. But it's also important for the way people feel when they're at their jobs. And so, yeah, I mean, I think right now, I think there's that swing back and having it be this like no-go zone, it's making people feel very insecure and feeling very unwelcome. And so I hope it finds a space where inclusivity and belonging, and I feel like, I belong here because I can be my best self and I can bring my authentic self, and whatever that is, right? Whatever your authentic self is, if you can show up fully and do your work, then that's a win. And I do think that that's going to be probably the most important space for us moving forward, to kind of not try and get into the which side is right, but to say, okay, like if everyone that we have working here feels like they fully belong and fully can show up, we're going to be a better organization for it. That feels like a space that everybody wins
Yeah.
in
Yeah, and I mean,
the middle
just to
ground.
simplify belonging, it's just feeling welcome at your workplace, right? Feeling like no matter who you are, whatever your background or political ideology, that's also another new thing now that seems to be, let's say, a screening for people of, what party are you're voting for. It's been incredible seeing the amount of discrimination I've seen in hiring according to political beliefs. It used to be other things, right? Race and so on. Now the two biggest, let's say, problems I've seen in recruitment, it's my personal experiences. Ageism is a big one, and the second one is political affiliation.
Hmm.
You know, like we've had customers straight out say to us, if the person has pronouns in their
Mm,
profile, we're not interviewing them just because they're most likely Democrat, right? Same
mm,
thing on uh, the liberal side, where we're not looking to hire Trump voters and things like that, right? And it's like, if we're going to discount, because it's 50-50 in the voting, if we're
mhm.
going to discount a whole section of the populace because of political affiliation, like it's almost like a purity test to be hiring people. That, to me, it's like, if you're looking at merit-based hiring, that could be a problem in general, right? So I can understand the belonging aspect. Do you feel though maybe that the whole idea, or let's say the whole DEI or DNI, just that terminology is now become toxic, where even if you mean well with it, like belonging, like who can fight the belonging? Like how can you argue against that, right? But because it's part of the whole other program, people are just, it becomes political, like a political football in the company, where it's hard to approach it even now. So
Yeah.
how do you make, what's the way forward with this, where like everything's politicized, everything's high intense, you're always worried about getting canceled one way or another? It seems pretty scary to operate that in HR that way.
Yeah, there's a lot of landmines. And I don't think anything is going to drastically change until like our society starts to bring the temperature down.
Yeah.
I don't know what does that, but I think as long as the external culture is ramping things up, then I think it will spill over into the work culture. I do think that, you know, naming that is important, because I think when you're HR and you're like, nothing's happening, everything's fine, like that's not real, right? And so I think there's a little bit of saying, look, this is stressful out there for all of its dynamics. In here, here are the rules of engagement. Here's how we're going to behave in here to make people feel welcome, to make people feel belong. And if this doesn't vibe for you, lots of other things that you can go do, right? But I think there has to be clear rules of engagement of how the company is going to treat its employees and how its employees are expected to treat each other, that fosters a sense of welcoming and inclusivity. And if it doesn't, that's just bad business. It's just as bad employee morale. And, I think about like employee engagement. That was, and I think continues to be a metric that most companies are measuring. How many people are staying, how long they're staying, how engaged are they, how their performance. It's directly tied to that, right? So if your employees don't feel like they belong or they don't feel like they can show up, they don't feel like they can talk to their manager, their engagement scores go down. And so I think if we just go back to the root of like, what are we trying to fix with engagement? It will be in there. It'll be in the recipe of how to fix that.
So how do you square that circle with, so this is the conundrum I'm thinking about is, on one hand, okay, we got to be neutral, let's say, about our politics at work by
Yeah.
but then you hear big companies having to become political. So here's an example, Disney, right?
Yeah.
They had to become political because, let's say, their employees, same thing at Netflix, their employees were demanding they become political and take a stand, right? How can you not take a stand when all these things are happening? And so
Hmm.
then it's like, well, then you're not neutral anymore. You are taking a stand. And others would say, well, it's our moral imperative to take a stand on certain things. And so then the CEO is like, there's almost no way to win here for them, because if they don't take a stand, they're viewed as cowards, let's say, or when there's moral injustice or whatever it may be. It's like, how do you stay neutral then as a company when there's all these conflicting forces kind of steering your ship, especially for larger, I'm talking about larger companies where they're public facing and they're, publicly traded, where even the shareholders may be asking for some kind of guidance on this, right? Like, what are you doing? What is our policy on this?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that the larger companies that are kind of they take a stand and they're very public about it, they're going to lose consumers just as much as they're going to win consumers,
Yeah.
right? So I think about like Costco, and I think about how Costco has I've seen, grow, but I'm sure there's different parts of the culture that are like, no, I'm not going to Costco anymore.
Yeah.
Like if their product is solid and their sales are solid, it'll weather the storm. It'll kind of ride it out. I also think if you don't take a stand and if you don't say a little bit of what you believe in, it's going to come out one way or the other. You may not publicly do it, but your behaviors are going to show people how you believe and like what you think. So it's easier and more transparent if you just say the thing versus, trying to avoid it and then your behaviors. I also think like people will vote with their dollars, they'll vote with their feet. And so a company can take a stand or they can go out of business and then like they have to do something different. Like Disney, they had to make a decision to, prosper. They can't ignore their employees and then have major revolt. I mean, it's not an easy situation, but I do think that those that kind of make the decision, stand publicly, and have the confidence with their product to move forward, they last a little bit longer than those that waffle.
Well, definitely waffling and going and walking back decisions looks terrible, right? So I can totally agree with that. I think people respect at least, conviction, as opposed to being just a coward. We tried saying something, but the blowback was too hard. We're going to have to walk about. We apologize. We apologize, right? I've seen that too. But yeah, it's tough because on one end, we're talking about creating a belonging culture at a company,
Hmm.
but yet the political stance could create people to feel it's become politically embroiled in everything. I think this is mainly for those big enterprises where they're very public and well known, right? For the smaller companies, no one really cares what the CEO thinks and what,
Hmm.
um, yeah, it's just those public facing, and all the scandals you see that happen with it. But no, when we're talking about, okay, so belonging, we can all agree, I think it's a pretty basic kind of thing. Happy workforce is a productive workforce, right? um but where do you think they're also going to focus on, like, inclusivity? What does that mean to you, and how would you adjust going forward with everything?
I mean, I think the inclusivity could lead to back to that conversation around like how we think about job profiles. and like what people bring to a job. Because I think about, you know, people that are introverted versus extroverted, what they're bringing with those variants of skills is going to fit different types of profiles. If you're neurodivergent, you know, I just think that you could crack open a job profile or a job description a little bit more broadly and thinking about all of the different types of skills and be more inclusive with the people that you're considering without having to fit so much of a requirements list. And I think if you're gaining experience, oh, I did this job for 2 years and then I rotated and I did this job, or I did part of this job, like you were saying, like I did a fractional of this and then I did a fractional, and you're building your skill set that way, that I think allows for inclusivity. That I think allows for different types of personas to fit into roles that maybe right now we're not allowing for in the same way. And maybe that's too Pollyanna to think about, but I do think inclusivity is in its core, it's taking down barriers that people are experiencing to do the work. And so if a barrier is, a certain work from home or work in the office requirement, if that's a barrier, could we take that away to make it more inclusive for people? And I think it can be as basic as that, so that more people that have limitations or have different situations that they need an environment to be a certain way, that it's more inclusive for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not always thought about, right? It's more of top down hierarchical kind of structure for a lot of these jobs. Like people are like, well, we want it, the boss says we want everybody in the office,
Yeah.
or something like that. It's more like the manager style or whatnot, and rather than what works best for these positions and what's going to give us the biggest pool of qualified candidates. Certain jobs can be flexible, right? So I can totally argue some jobs should be only remote while some jobs should be in office. You can do the same argument for either, depending on what it is. And there's a case behind it, right, in terms of how the workflow is and whatnot. And I think it's just like being a good TA leader to understand what is he actually doing in this job. What are the KPIs? What are we tracking? What does good look like in terms of performance? And how can we offer more options to people?
Mhm.
And I think this is also where the pendulum maybe has incorrectly started swinging to the return to office, instead of like during COVID, we had those conversations about introverts were thriving, working mothers were happy. Like there was so many things that were helping with the remote work. And it's like, did we forget all the lessons that we learned? I don't know. There was a lot of good lessons that you could see some labor participation for certain groups improve with remote working, right? That's all proven stats. So definitely interested in seeing sort of how we as we go into the new, the new AI world that we're going into, like how are we going to adapt these jobs for the changing world of work? And have we learned anything from all the data we've been able to gather now? Because we've had a huge experiment, right, with everything being remote, rather than just a knee-jerk reaction of, well, everyone back to the office, just a blanket kind of term, which I've seen kind of happen now. So some companies, I think, have been, like smaller companies are less stringent with these things. I was talking to a startup the other day. They're like, oh, we can have all our people in office in California, they were saying initially.
Mm.
After talking to them, we're like, well, you know what? Maybe we can do remote. I mean, if that's fine, it's a better person, right? And it's like that curiosity can go. So I think a lot of times is just having those conversations and being able to speak to, as you're talking about inclusivity, like, oh, I didn't consider that, you know,
Right, right.
and I didn't understand their workflow. And yeah, that makes sense that, they don't need to be in the office. Big example is my cousin works in patent office.
Hmm.
He has to get confidential paperwork and take it to a special office where no one can look at it. It's confidential patents, right?
Mhm.
So you don't want people seeing this information, but yet the office space they gave him was an open concept office. He's like, listen, I can't even do my work legally here. I'm going home until you figure your shit out.
Yeah.
So same thing with other kind of the jobs where it's like, let's think not only like how to do the workflow in the job, but let's also think about, are we creating barriers, as you said, for employment because of strict things that really are not that important as we thought they were? Let's take a look at each job case by case basis rather than blanket statements. So I can appreciate that. But where do you think, I mean, from what I've seen lately, the whole DEI, let's say those positions are gone now.
Mhm. Mhm.
Companies are walking it back everywhere. So how do we still do the work on culture if they're literally just they're trying to cut it out everywhere, right? But culture still matters.
Yeah.
So does that fall now to HR? And they're like, well, I don't want to do this. I'm busy with comp and ben and whatever else. Like, how do you feel that's going to play out?
I mean, personally, I feel like if you're not paying attention to culture as one of your main drivers, then you're not doing your core HR work. And so if it feels like culture is a side thing or a side hustle, it's probably because you have a really bad culture. Um, so like I think it has to be fully integrated into how you do your performance reviews and how you do your succession planning and how you do, all of your talent work. The culture has to be fully integrated. And so many companies right now are in transformation mode, right? They're either pivoting customers or they're shedding certain parts of their business and doubling down on other areas. That's a culture change, whether you want to call it that or not. And so I think you have to pay attention to like what are the skills of the people you need to have more of? Where are you letting things go? How are you communicating with those that are left? And so for me, it's like culture is in every HR job, but it's also in every leader job. If you're a leader and you don't think culture is important, you're probably a crappy leader because you're creating that culture whether you know it or not. Just showing up and managing people creates culture. And so be thoughtful about it, be intentional about it, and have a point of view. I think companies that have a significant point of view of like, this is the culture we have, or this is the culture we want, if you are intentional about saying it, then your actions will follow. If you don't think about it, it'll just form itself. So, I'm really like in my job hunt, I'm very curious about how executives at potential companies think and talk about culture because it tells me a lot about whether it would be a good spot for me.
I know, and that's a key thing, I think, for if you're trying to attract top talent
Yeah.
and you're not able to convey the culture and be passionate about culture building, like that's a major point for a lot of people. Like, there's been a lot of layoffs in the last few years. People don't want to go to another disaster. They want to have some, like, they call it job hugging right now, right? Everybody is trying to find a job to hang on to because they're like, it's lot roller coaster economy, crazy stuff going on, jobs lost, sectors closing. I've talked to like 20 supply chain executives in the last month because they've lost their jobs because of tariffs and how
Mm,
that's affected the industry, right? All those people are now looking for new jobs. They're pivoting their careers and they're scared. They're like, I can't afford another layoff. It'll look bad on my resume if I keep job hopping. I really need to grab and really dig into some place that's going to be good. And if you're not able to convey that in the interview, then yeah, it's not only about pay, right?
no, no.
So
Right.
I totally get that. Well, we'll end on that note, and maybe people will think twice about you know how they're talking about their culture, and maybe it doesn't have to be a scary thing. It could be as simple as just how you treat people day to day. That's like, let's not overcomplicate things either.
No,
You know,
no, it's pretty basic. Can you be a
yeah,
nice human?
be a nice human. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being on our show today.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Great to talk with you.